Hey everybody, welcome back to the Meaning Forge. Today in this episode, I have Daniel Nestle with me. Daniel Nestle is an advocate for a rewarding professional career and a creative calling on the other. He believes in the human connection to help shape our lives, therefore putting him in a position to never stop learning. Now, since Dan has his own podcast, his podcast helps serve, the Dan Nestle Show helps serve his creative drive and develop himself in the future. So I look forward to this interview as we look at how Dan makes, embodies, and shares meaning in his life. Welcome to the Meaning Forge. Hey Dan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jim, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for having me on. I love the intro, man. I mean, the power of human connection, creativity, it's all there. Thanks. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Well, it's normally a great conversation. I don't think I've had many bad conversations on this. That's the good news.
Wasn't that the great thing about people? I mean, when you start to get into it and you really dig into what drives people, it's really hard to have somebody who just has nothing interesting to say. Now, of course, I'm about to talk, so I don't know. I can't speak for myself, but I mean, it's one of the reasons why I do a podcast. I think everybody's got something really interesting to uncover and to offer and to discover. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad to be on the other side of this today, and finding, I guess, maybe helping to figure out that meaning that we're trying to drive to with the Forge. I love the metaphor that you're using and the symbology and everything. I'm sure we're going to get into it, but I'm a fan already. Thanks, Jim. I appreciate everything you're doing so far.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks so much for coming on, and definitely want to give a shout out to your show, especially now and towards the end. So remember, it's the Dan Nestle podcast.
The Dan Nestle Show. That's right.
Yep. So, and there'll be a link in the description on where to find that. So. Well, the favorite question I always ask, it's really simple because we have to start laying the groundwork, right? We have to start finding all the materials for the Meaning Forge, and that's typically found in people's lives.
Yeah.
So first off, the dreaded interview question is, Dan, tell me about yourself, kind of, who you are and where you came from, and then we'll start from there.
It depends on how much detail you want to get into, because I can go, believe me. A lack of words is never really my problem, but I guess we can start. I'm just a kid from Bayonne, New Jersey, really. And I don't know if you know where Bayonne is, but it's in northern Jersey. It's a small town right outside of New York City. So it's really urban and dense, right? In Hudson County. And, I grew up there and ended up leaving Bayonne and heading to Philadelphia for college, and then off to Japan right after school. And it's very, very rare for a kid from Bayonne to make it all the way to Japan. And so, that puts me in a sort of like unique place already. And, it's sent my life in certainly different directions than anybody I grew up with. And even today, after I've come back to the States, and I've been back for like 10 years now, but, after spending so much time abroad in Japan, coming back to the States, I still have that connection with Bayonne, but they say you can never go home again. And I think it's true. It's still hard for me to relate, back to a lot of things about my childhood and certainly my hometown, but I still love the place. I have a soft spot in my heart for it and all that. But anyway, after I graduated college, I went to Japan. And Japan was probably more where I was forged, I think, as like maybe if you think about, your childhood, of course, is probably the primary place. But then, the most influence after that probably happened in the 16 years I lived in Japan. And, I did a bunch of different things. And I started off there teaching English, went into recruitment, like for headhunting for IT professionals and finance people and sales and marketing people and so on. And ultimately, though, just figured out that my calling was not neither of those things. And I just decided that, I really like to write. I like Japan. I like writing about Japan. I like helping business in Japan. So what can I do to kind of put all that together? So I started a business to to do copywriting and editing services for Japanese companies in Tokyo. And that evolved over time into what became more of a marketing and communications consultancy. I eventually was picked up by, I guess, my last client, who hired me on as a a real marketing and PR manager. So yeah, I mean, I had come from basically no career path at all, really, and then just started this little business that put me on a path. I mean, it was like creating my own future. And I then became marketing PR manager for a foreign company in Tokyo. That took me to Australia for a year. A couple of years later, I eventually returned back to the States, changed job a couple of times, but where I ended up is after being back in the States for 10 years, I ended up back at a Japanese company, a big Japanese company. The irony of it all is that in Japan, I'd never really worked for a major Japanese company. I had a couple of Japanese clients, but coming back to the States, spending a couple of years, building my career here, then I got a job with a Japanese company, and that job led to another job with another Japanese company. So now I'm leading communications for the Americas for a big Japanese company called Lixil, and your listeners and our watchers, our viewers might know Lixil from our big brands like American Standard. I'm sure you've sat on one of our products in your time. So American Standard, another plumbing brand called Groa. So, but I do corporate communications. So I'm all about our mission and our vision and helping out our executives and really just sort of trying to connect what we do with people. So anyway, that's the professional side. Personal side, while I was in Japan, I met my soulmate. She's wonderful. She's Japanese. Her name's Yuko, and she's been my wife now for 20 years. Yeah. We got married in 2001. So this year is 21 for us. I have two daughters, and they're 15 and 17. So, I just kind of live the life of a kind of typically irrelevant father of teenage girls, right? I mean, they don't want to have much to do with me. So, I've got my professional life, I've got my dad and husband life. And, now that, I work at home most of the time, those lives often collide and intermix. So, it's all kind of, merged together. But yeah, it's brought me to a really interesting point in my life. And I should say, of course, that, I'm in New Jersey. When I came back from Japan, I came back to New Jersey, originally to Bayonne, but then now I'm living near Princeton. So, a little roundabout there, but I think that gives you the general story of where I've been and where I'm at.
That is the general story. And it sounds like you're like a little globetrotter.
Oh man.
I've got a few people who I've interviewed who turned into globetrotters, or who are globetrotters in more ways than one.
I never thought of myself as a globetrotter necessarily. I thought like I really wanted to go to Japan, and we can get into that at some point. I'm sure we will during the conversation, because it was a big driver for me in my youth. It was a big theme of my teenage years, and my college years. But I interviewed a guy named Kyle. I'm going to forget his name, but he wrote a book called The Accidental Business Nomad. And that's what I feel like. I'm rather than a globetrotter, I ended up being an accidental nomad, wandering around the world, and Japan in particular.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so like there's a lot of that, like it's very culturally conscious, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the right way to put it, because it's everywhere right now. There's the nomadic lifestyle. There's never being really tied to one area or something like that, wanting to get more experiences. And it's important. It's really important. I think the first kind of a question to kind of dial in on here is, I think it's funny you said you can never go back home.
Yeah.
And like I feel that, because I think when you leave and you come back to somewhere, it's not the same. It's not that maybe that place hasn't changed, or maybe it's you've changed.
Yeah.
What's a significant memory that you have before you left,
Mm-hmm.
To go to Philly and then on to Japan, that resounds with you even today?
Gosh. So, well, first of all, it's an interesting path to kind of dig down into. Um, Bound was a small town in that everybody knew each other. It's not like a tiny town of population wise. There's about 65,000 people there. But my family had been there for ages, and everybody knew each other. It was a very close neighborhood. And this is like, okay, so just to age me a little bit, we're talking about growing up in the 70s and 80s. So I'm pure Gen X, right? Um, our but still we're talking pre-digital times, and your growing up was hanging out with your friends outside playing street hockey, or or flag football, or touch football, really, usually. And if you wanted to, if your parents went out, your grandma came and picked you up, or you walked over to your grandma's house, because everything's walking distance. Nobody drove anywhere. So I guess when I think about it, a lot of things stand out. Maybe, like, I think one of the biggest images is probably thinking about my grandmother. She had a knitting store right around the corner from my house. So, I lived in a little neighborhood, and my grandma lived like 2 blocks away, and her store was 2 blocks in the other direction. And she used to pass by our neighborhood every morning, walking up to the store, and she'd go to her store and then come back every day. And so I saw my grandma all the time. This is my dad's mom. And her store was called Dan Nestle Yarns. She sold yarn, knitting materials and yarns and stuff. But what there's so many memories. One that I think sticks out is, I'd go to my grandma's when I was a little kid, to the store, and I'd hang out there and pretend to use the cash register, because she never really had much business. So I could pretend to use the cash register. It was one of those old, like, turn of the century antique cash registers. And I'm pushing these buttons, and she's, yeah, get out of here, kid. And she always had this gaggle of ladies around her. And she just would talk. She'd like hold court, sit there and tell stories. And I'd crawl around on her dirty yarn floor, whatever it was. Or I'd go next door to the shop next door, which was a music store. And the lovely lady Irene there would let me, check out the records and listen to music and, whatever. But like between those two places, I'd spend a lot of my hours while I was a little kid. And I just remember my grandma telling all these stories. And I think that that it was almost like my version of the campfire, like listening to her talk. Didn't really think of it too much at the time, but she was funny and engaging and dominant. She's like 5 feet tall, but she owned the room. I think a lot of my storytelling now, or my I guess my career in communications and PR, which is based in its core at telling stories. I think I owe a lot of that to my grandma. So, that memory certainly anchors me. There's a lot of other things, but that's one I think I can share pretty readily.
Oh, that was a good one. I was already forgive the pun here, but I was already taking the threads and putting the threads together already.
Well, so funny. Amazing. Yeah. She's the threads from her yarns. Yarn is another word for a story. She had this yarn store. I don't know. I never saw her sell any wool. Never.
Well,
I think she just had people there and talked.
We'll fast forward now, and I really like to know, what was the major driving reason for you to go to Japan? You've alluded to it, but like what was the aha moment?
Okay, so I suppose this is another story, and it all goes back to Bayonne. There's this great little comic from New Yorker or Atlantic magazine or something from 40, 50, 60 years. I forget, but some people have shown me this comic a million times, and it just says, I'm a citizen of the world, but I'm based in Bayonne. And people made fun of Bayonne. It was not exactly the intellectual capital of the world. If you're familiar with the old show called The Honeymooners, Ralph Cramsey used to make fun of Bayonne. Mary Tyler Moore would make fun of Bayonne. It was not exactly, the shining pinnacle of civilization. But a lot sort of for me started there, and so my connection to Japan actually started there as well. So when I was 12, my dad passed away. And you want to talk about a moment and that changes your life, and that's like a defining thing. That's probably the defining thing about my life, maybe period. Um, but I was part of a community that cared, and my mom was strong, and she's a teacher, so I was surrounded by teachers and people. We didn't have any hardships or anything like that. But I was only 12 at the time, and it, it was my rabbi. So I was, I'm Jewish, and I was growing up in a very reform, like not reform meaning not religious at all. Part of like of my community, and I went to Hebrew school. I went to temple every now and then, but I wasn't very religious at all. So my rabbi, turns out that he's training me for my bar mitzvah at the time. So Jewish kids, we have bar mitzvah age 13. We've got to learn how to read some Hebrew for that, or not actually Aramaic. It's the language of the Torah, right? So anyway, I was taking my lessons, and my rabbi though was the coolest dude, right? You wouldn't think rabbi, cool dude, but he was really young at the time. He's like probably only in his early 30s. And I was 12, but he's really young. He was new to town. So he had just come and taken over our congregation just around the time that my dad died. So I was his first funeral and also his first bar mitzvah, it turns out. And I'd go over his house. We'd study a little bit, or in his office, study a little bit. And, he starts introducing me to things like music, because, obviously my dad had just passed. So I spent more time with him probably than as a mentor and as a sort of surrogate father figure or big brother figure in some ways than I might have had my dad still been around. But he introduced me to The Who and to Alice Cooper, the Grateful Dead, and Led Zeppelin. Like my rabbi here, okay? Like these things don't necessarily go together. And he used to tell a story about how he didn't go to Woodstock because he met a girl and went on a date with her instead. It turns out that he married her, but he was of that generation, the Woodstock generation. And his wife was and is a potter, right? She does pottery, really into Japanese pottery. Their home was decorated with this beautiful Japanese pottery work. And I was looking at it, and Rabbi says, "Oh, these are Japanese style. Are you familiar with, Japan?" And he starts to teach me, in addition to stuff about the bar mitzvah, he starts to teach me this little game of Go, right? You might be familiar with Go, with the stones. The kids version is called Gomoku, actually, and it's more like Othello or Connect Four, but still the idea is you put the stones down and you sit around for a while and you have strategy and you learn a lot. And anyway, he taught me about Go, and he started the Japan conversation for me, and he starts talking about Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote the Book of the Five Rings, legendary samurai swordsman. And it just sort of hooked me. And I think our conversations would often kind of veer toward the idea of simplicity, of minimalism. He, would share some ideas about Shinto and Buddhism, and like the what we think of as religions in Japan, even though they're not really that way. But anyway, it just sort of hooked that way. So that got me hooked in Japan, and it just stayed with me. And my, then I started to look into, okay, well, there's some Japanese books, and Japanese. I didn't go the anime route, like the animation route that a lot of kids go. I didn't get hooked on Japan because I really liked, what was at the time, I guess, Star Blazers, or because that was big at the time, but like early anime, and like then Akira comes out in the 80s, and it blew my mind. But that's not why I went to Japan. It just sort of started to grow on me. And then I get to college, and this whole Japan thing's still bubbling up in my head. And turns out that at Penn, the Japanese language course was one of the most highly rated courses around. And I didn't want to take Spanish anymore. So I was like, I'll do something different. I'll take Japanese. I was very interested in Japan anyway. Took Japanese. I took freshman year, didn't have any language courses, but sophomore year I took Japanese, and that was the end of it. I mean, that was that was the, okay, you're on this train now and you're not getting off, was as soon as I started taking Japanese class. And yeah, that put me on the path that eventually led me to Japan.
That's really cool in a lot of ways. And I think we can go down a lot of different rabbit holes very quickly,
man.
but we gotta
warned
be
you.
careful. We gotta be careful.
I warned you.
Well, one of the things that I kind of want to dial in on now, one more question before we move on to the hammer is, what was what was the moment or moments that forced you to go into marketing and communication versus the career path that you were on?
Well, I think about that a lot because sometimes I question why I punish myself to be a PR guy and a marketing guy. No, I love it. I love marketing PR, and it wasn't something that made me or forced me to go there necessarily. I think that I really didn't have much of a career path. That was my problem, right? That was one of my issues. Is I was like, I knew that I liked Japan. I loved things about Japan. I knew that I liked being around people, so when I was recruiting, I was dealing with connections and relationships. That's, by the way, that's not the way I thought of it at the time, but when thinking of it now, it was about, relationships, building relationships. When I worked inside a company for recruitment later, it was all about like managing people who make those relationships happen. And then, so on and so forth. And I was great with the relationship stuff. I wasn't really that thrilled about monetizing those relationships, right? Because when you're selling, you have to like take those relationships and say, yeah, by the way, you're going to buy something. I'm oversimplifying, but I wasn't. And sometimes I wonder why. And I kind of, smack myself in the head a little bit, like, oh, I should have been a little bit more open to the idea, but I wasn't super comfortable, trying to get business out of the people that I built relationships with. And by the way, if you are, that's great. I shouldn't have that barrier, but that barrier did exist for me. So I just kind of started to veer towards how could I support and serve rather than be the kind of deal maker. And, that led me to look at, writing and looking at, creative things. Cause I was like, oh, but I could write, a good writer. And, I know people need help with that because I look around me and the writing sucks. So this is something I'm pretty sure I could help people with. And that's sort of the germ of the idea where it started. And that set me on that path for marketing and communications. Because the core skill to certainly to communications, the core skill is writing. And, you can't be a good communicator if you can't put a sentence together in writing. It's almost impossible. Even today, when I hire people, there's various jobs within a comms team and a communications team, but the common thread that we all share is that we can always write something. So, that writing bit is really the kind of core skill that I leaned on, and that got me in front of a bunch of different clients. It got me into the business I ended up, becoming PR marketing manager for. And then the whole idea of marketing just sort of came to me because it just turned out that's what I was doing. I didn't have the intent, right? My intent was to just kind of get clients and write things and get money, but at a certain point, it's like, wait a second, I can get jobs from the clients and I can write things and make money, or I can get a bigger job from the client. I can write this part, but then I can get other people to do these other parts, right? But I'll be in the front, so I'll get the money for that. And, I'll pay these people. So in other words, I ended up kind of building what is an agency approach without knowing that's what I was doing. So I started to do these projects. Oh, you need a website? Sure. And by the way, we're talking about early 2000s. So doing a website was basically like doing a digital brochure, which meant a lot of writing. So, okay, yeah, I could do a website for you. I could do this for you. Sure. You need a database? Yeah, no problem. And I would find people to do these things. I'd put it together. And then before you know it, I'm doing these kind of consulting gigs and I'm marketing. That's what you're doing, Dan. Somebody say, that's what you're doing, Dan. You're marketing now. I'm like, wow, I'm a marketer. And then I took it to heart. And after I kind of put on that hat like officially as a marketing and PR manager, I eventually did go and get my master's in internet marketing. I really went down that path, and I include communications in that because it's sort of, they're so closely related. It's really about what audience you're talking to, and like when it comes down to it. But yeah, that's what got me on that path, and that's why I sort of just went that way.
Perfect. All right, so I think that's a good swath, right? We know where you come from. You're right from New Jersey all the way to where you are now. We have some major key decision points there, and I think we have enough to really enter into the forge. So let's go ahead and head in, and let's start forging our sword.
Yes.
All right, I gotta fix something real quick. It's driving me crazy. Can't just have it one flag. Has to just split them all in the middle. Call it a day. I thought my office would be centered. I'm not.
Yeah. I have that problem too. Same thing.
All right. So welcome now. We're really in the forge, and we're starting to bring together the materials.
It's hot.
The materials. Oh yeah, it's hot.
It's hot in here.
In the forge of life. And we're wielding, well, I say we go ahead and wield Mjolnir. That's Thor's hammer. And start forging away the sword. Of course, now there's some other mythology isms that we can get all crazy about, but we're not. One of the things that I kind of want to address is I see these materials already, right? So one, it's storytelling, writing, communication, right? And we can almost kind of bundle those up in their own little, its own little thing. And then there's something I think that you dialed in on when you were talking about the influence of your rabbi. And that was on pottery, the simplicity and some of the minimalist aspects of Japanese culture. And even then, like, that's not very minimal. Like, their Japanese culture is extremely deep. In more ways than one. It's just on the surface, there's some quick things. And I guess the first question I would ask is, what's the hardest part about making something complex simple, like a story?
So that's really the core of everything that we try to do. I mean, if you can figure out exactly that, how do you make something complex simple, then that's the number one kind of deliverable. It's the number one kind of skill or talent that you have to evolve and develop as a communicator, but not just as a communicator, as a marketer, as a creator, really, I think, but certainly as a communicator. So to get something from that complexity to that simplicity, I don't think there's one way. People have different approaches. A lot of it's kind of evolved through experience and sometimes pain, sometimes just straight up method and technique, sometimes combination, more often a combination of both probably. But it's really about that complexity for me anyway. First, you have to understand that you're in a complex system. So if you're in the midst of complexity and you don't recognize that you're in the midst of complexity, then you just feel like you're being battered around by chaos. And that can happen. And it has happened many times throughout my life. And sometimes you just have to find that point where you get grounded and you're like, oh, wait a second. Wait. I get it. The trick is, or it's not even a trick, it's you have to have that, your mind has to kind of find that the right lens. Your eyes have to find the right lens. Your mind has to find that right framework, where you can shift and you can look and see, okay, I get it. There's complexity here, and I can now identify the different parts that are happening, identify the things around you. So the first thing is you have to get a sense and a grip of what that complexity is, and how that rules your kingdom. Because, frankly, complexity is not chaos, right? Complexity is only chaos if you don't understand it, and you let it go amok, or run amok. Complexity just is a state of being where there's a lot of different elements that you need to put in line, and that's where it starts. So you sort of start there, look at the various elements, and you play a game. This one fits with this one. This one doesn't fit with this one. There's ways that you can, aid yourself in that respect. If it's a writing project, or if it's a kind of business issue, maybe you can write all these things down, or you can mind map it, or you can, there's a lot of things that you could do. The point is to get sense of that complexity. And once you can define that complexity, then it's not that hard to make it simple. Then you either make it simple by subtraction, right? You take things away that are not as important, right? Or the more challenging thing to do is understand what is connecting all of those things together. There's something connecting. There's a connector there. That's the beauty of story. A good story is what connects, all these different pieces together, or a good theme, maybe, So I'm racking my brain to think of an example here, but the idea is when you have different elements of your life, or of a program, or something around you. If you can find those commonalities, then you can draw a thread, and that's what you then start to talk about. That becomes your core story, and everything else can be brought in as you go. So, simplifying is really just another way of saying rearranging the information.
I really liked how you broke that out. And one of the things that I always say is a good story has multiple layers, right?
Mhm.
And those layers are what add complexity as they interact with one another, right? Because this layer up top can interact with this layer in the middle, and then the bottom layer simultaneously, or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be. And so it's understanding the layers, but you can't understand all of them, and it's an infinite type of problem. But that's a good
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And so
Good editing is really important. And I don't mean like you have to become a wordsmith editor. I mean, just mentally, you have to understand that sometimes your job is to edit. It's to cut out that extra stuff that only you think is important. That's all. It's the only point that it's serving. The only purpose that extra stuff is serving is to obfuscate, to stop clarity. And you remove all that, and then you get down to that core of whatever it is you're trying to get across.
what was a significant, I guess, a significant experience that highlighted um a pain point,
Mhm.
or clouded your experience, like who you are, like who you wanted to become, and
Mhm.
what did you learn from that?
So, I mean, there's so many in life. Um, but let me just go to I guess one that's sort of indicative, I suppose, of I mean, and this sort of helps with this simplicity story as well, or getting to simplicity, but of a pain point that I had to overcome, and the only way to get through it was to go through it. So when I left Japan for the for the for the first time, really, or I guess it was for the last time, in 2009, right? So we're talking a while ago. It's already 13 years. That's unbelievable to me. But I left Japan to move to Australia. I went straight from Tokyo to Sydney, and I was working for this great company at the time, and if you recall, around that time, we were in the middle of one of the worst financial crises in the history of our country, of the U.S. When I say our country, I mean America, the United States. So, originally I was supposed to be moving from Japan back to the States with this company, but then this company's like, look, we're firing people in the States. We can't hire people there, but we want to keep you. We have to also kind of shrink the Japan side of the business, but we want to keep you. So there's this great role in Sydney. You're going to love it. You'll be in charge of XYZ and PR and marketing for the region. You'll be reporting into the same guy you're reporting into now. It's going to be great. So I looked at the move and the potential of moving to Sydney. Who doesn't want to live in Australia? I mean, Australia is it is the most gorgeous place on earth. I believe it is. Like it's so beautiful and the beaches are incredible. And look, it's one of the happiest places on earth. Australians are very happy people. So I figured, here I am. I got 2 little kids at the time, like really little. They were only 2 and 4 years old. What a great opportunity. So without thinking much, I talked with the company and they're like, here, we're going to pay you this much money. I'm like, oh, great. I'll chase the money. I'll chase the shiny new object of living in Sydney. It's going to be great because I'm going to get a great new apartment. I'm going to get a great new car. I'm going to live near new environment. I'm going to have new friends. Everything's new, right? So I went down to Australia, so naive, so over-optimistic, and ignored every voice in my head and a lot of the voices around me that were saying, it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be that easy. Moving is hard, first of all. You're moving to a whole different culture, and culture shock's a real thing. I didn't believe them, but culture shock's a real thing. Mm-hmm. And by the way, Australia is really expensive. Like, I'm getting paid well. I wasn't getting paid that well. It just looked like I was getting paid well. I didn't investigate. So I got all of these kind of great new, I got really entranced by this whole idea of newness and of this new chance and of hey, Australia, it's going to be cool, that I just ignored all of these things that are bubbling up. So I go to Australia and I start my new job, and within weeks, I'm miserable, miserable. Now, there were office dynamics going on that I couldn't understand because I come from a Japanese environment. Even though I was working for that company in Japan, it was still sort of Japanese-y environment where culture is very different. Culture is deferential, right? You defer to your bosses. Everybody goes out to lunch together, right? I go to Australia and everybody's in your face and everybody's eating lunch at their desk. And it's just like, so I felt like people are and people weren't super welcoming to me either because I was new and I was, not a proven kind of entity here. And I just assumed everybody liked me because, the company's bringing me over, but that wasn't the case either. So suddenly I'm in this position where I have to prove myself, as a good bloke, right? One of my strengths has always been, hey, I'm a good guy, but nobody believed me. So I had to prove that. And, I had to essentially rebuild my reputation. I had to take on this marketing and communications job. I thought was this marketing PR, which I thought was the same, but it was not the same, And then there's other elements where I was supposed to be taking over the job from somebody else who never left. So here I am in a weird team dynamic. Top to bottom, it was a losing combination. But you know what? The beaches were nice. The weather was beautiful. I saw dolphins on the way to work, right? So I kept convincing myself, my kids' school was amazing. My wife was having a fantastic time. Our neighbors were wonderful people. Everything was great on that side. But I would leave the house in the morning. I'd walk down to the ferry. I'll tell you, you think about commuting, like commuting to work. A lot of people who are in cities, although now there's a lot of remote work, but still you talk about driving to the train station, getting on a train, getting to the city, doing walking, whatever, or being on subways. Commute is a miserable thing. I was arguably the most beautiful commute in the world. You get on this ferry in Manly, 30 minutes across Sydney Harbor, right? Whales. I mean, dolphins, penguins. I mean, come on, man. It's like colored birds of all different shapes and sizes. You'd have these beautiful purple jacaranda trees blooming in the springtime. It's so beautiful. And every moment of that was utter torture to me, because I'd get off in the central business district and I'd be like, this is terrible. I go to work and at the end of the day, like, I'd be like, I just want to go home. But no, I had to go out drinking with everybody because there's a drinking culture every single night, 10 rounds, right? A couple nights a week. I was younger, but I still wasn't that young. I mean, I couldn't handle 10 pints a night. So
that would hurt me.
yeah. So all this stuff is happening, and I just, couldn't, it was out of control. And finally I decided to see a counselor who really just said, mate, you need to simplify. You need to simplify everything. Like, take things one step at a time. And there are some of these hurdles you have at work that you will not be able to handle by yourself. And it may be worth just changing, just like leaving that situation, but it was a matter of eliminating the things that didn't matter to me. And I ultimately came to the decision that, my health was more important than the job. My family is more important than the job. And I narrowed it down to that one thread of health and family and, purpose. And I wasn't getting it there. So I ended up leaving, and I spent a couple of months recuperating from my job, luckily on the beaches of Australia, and then came back to the States a couple months later. Yeah.
Nice. Well, it's important to be able to cut those things away and to understand, and maybe this is an oversimplification, right? But to understand what matters, when it matters, and how it matters.
Yeah.
So that way we can just kind of cut out the rest of the noise and align ourselves. And that was perfect, because the idea I was kind of getting at was, what's the hardest part about making who we are at any given time? And sometimes that is exactly it. So thanks for stepping into my trap.
No, you got it. I mean, it's just sometimes you just don't see it, right? You can't see what's happening to you. You have to step outside or have somebody help you understand what's going on with you. And then, like, only experience and life and pain sometimes teach you what to look out for. Like, you don't know that you're going through something terrible or potentially bad because it's never happened before, right?
Yep.
You just, it's just me, or it's like it's my problem. But frankly, there's a lot of ways that your brain can go fire in the wrong directions. And if you don't know, if you're not aware of what those are. So now, of course, years later, the end result of that experience is I have a much keener sense of when I am teetering on the edge of dissatisfaction, of, okay, I'm going the wrong direction, or anxiety is getting the better of me. Any number of these things. I am much more self-aware of when forces outside of me and even forces within me are pushing me the wrong way.
With that, I think that's the perfect segue into the sword now.
Yes.
All right, so we're in the sword, right? And Dan, what I think, kind of where we are is the sword you made with Mjolnir. It is something you're embodying, carrying with you now at your side. It's a symbol of confidence, all that other fun stuff. You've learned to, kind of take away the excess material and understand what's applicable and what's not. And of course, I think is key to some like, again, simplicity, telling stories, and understanding that the importance of communication, and the sword is just as much a communication tool as anything else is. And so hang on, I gotta look at my notes again. So was there a time recently where you were extremely confident in what you were doing?
Mhm.
And how did that turn out uh, to you, both your personal and your professional side?
Ooh, it's interesting you bring up confidence because that's one of those things that's, again, like a question. Uh, for me, it's always been a question. How confident am I? I mean, I've had confidence issues from time to time. But I find myself a lot more confident about things. Of course, the later I get in my career, um, I've just sort of figured out that confidence comes just from knowledge and experience, and sometimes sometimes it's certainly a positive mindset. So all these things together sort of come together for confidence. And in that respect, I feel like I've been pretty confident in my role for the last several years for sure, and certainly my professional life, definitely. And one of the things I guess recently, and maybe this is a really great example because I'm going to talk about how I've been really confident about something, but it hasn't been going exactly the way that I planned. Okay, but because I'm confident, I don't care so much. Right? I mean, I care, but but not in the way that you might think. So in communications, right, there is uh, uh, a a a growing, I guess, body of work being done in the PR and communications world, called Comtech, right? Communications technology. If you're a marketer, you understand MarTech, marketing technology. So this is basically the idea of using digital tools and uh, platforms that are available to you in order to reach your audiences better and more effectively, to measure using digital technology to measure what you're doing, and to assign a whole new level of accountability to the activities that you do, for as a communicator, as a marketer, and so on. Now, if you're not in marketing communications, you have experienced it from the other side, which is, at the very simple, in the very simplest way, maybe you see an ad on LinkedIn or in a newsletter or, somewhere in an email, and you click on that ad and then you see and this is, by the way, the simplest instance of what a Comtech experience might look like. You click on the ad, you get a pop-up that says, oh yeah, give us your information and you'll get the report, right? So you sign in, and then, as a result of you providing information, you are able to download some kind of a report or something that interests you, right? For a communications person, um, that's a good way for us to deliver information about, you know, about sustainability or about like a company's purpose or a brand's like causes that we care about or like leadership positions. For a marketer, that's a good way to deliver like product information, things like that.
Mhm.
So anyway, I've been doing this for years and I know how it works. What I've just described is a very, very basic version, but there's a lot of different variables that you can tweak and play with and see how it goes. Anyway, in my current role, um, this is still a relatively new field for a lot of companies. So I uh, very confidently said that this is what we need to do, right? Um, we need to build a campaign in this manner, using these tools to deliver this message to this particular audience. And don't you worry, because we're going to use some of the marketing tools like advertisements to draw and targeting to find the right people. We're going to get the really cool creative in front of them. We're going to make sure they're interested and they're going to download our information, and we're all winners. Um, very clear to me. I had to sell this into the company. I had to talk to people about it, but look, this is what I do. So anyway, I'm running the campaign. Guess what's not happening? Nobody's downloaded our information, right? There's no the tools are working, the platforms are working, but the result is not happening. So I think earlier in my career, and now, what that's the effect of that is that I had to break it down and take that complex system that I had just built or help, we have these various inputs, break it down to its parts and say, okay, we don't need this part. We don't need this part. We're missing something over here, and experiment with new things to try to make it work better or to see what we missed the first time around. And this is an iterative process and we keep doing it. You know what? Now we're starting to get better results. Okay. But what happened was, because I was confident about this, because I knew it was right, I just plowed forward, and instead of telling my boss or other people in the company, no, don't worry, everything's going great, and then sweating about it, I was very clear. Look, so we're able to do this, but you know what? We weren't able to get the result that we wanted. So here are the steps that I'm taking to make it work next time. And you know what? If it doesn't work this time around, I'll take another step. And if it doesn't work that time, I'll take another step. And I'm going to keep taking different steps as long as I'm not wasting money. And as long as there is an endpoint where we're going to say, okay, this works or this doesn't work. Right? And if it doesn't work, then I will know why it didn't work. And I'll tell you, it's not because the method's not right. And it's not because it wasn't right to do this kind of approach. It will be because maybe we didn't hit the right topic with the right people at the right time. It'll be because of something softer that we don't know. See, and I'm confident in that because I know that this whole thing is how it works, how communications works. And that's from sweat and from hard work and from learning.
Yeah, you never know the other, like you can only dial into certain layers.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't always know the other layers, the other pieces of the equation. And kind of recap there. I mean, I think what I'm picking up from that story and that you being confident is it's not only it's relying on what you can and cannot control, communicating it truthfully, and then saying, hey, I'm taking the responsibility here, and here. I'm saying this is the best way that we can. Here's action 1, action 2. Okay, this, iterative process. We're building this out. We're going to fail along the way. And is that a fair assessment?
It really is. But there's one element that I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, go ahead.
That makes this all possible. That you have people around you that empower you and trust you. Right. I kind of had a feeling going this direction, but I couldn't do that in a vacuum. Right. I couldn't walk into a company and say, no, this is the way we're doing it because I'm confident. I have to have the buy-in from the people who are paying me essentially, but really to the people who have given me their trust. I've earned it through my career, but also I've earned it through the relationships that I'm building. And, who are giving me the room and saying, no, Dan, we respect you and want you to experiment. And it's okay to fail a little bit, right? It's okay. But it's okay, right? Learn from that. If you fail fast, stop, learn, right? That's such an important environment to be in. And that is what really, that more than anything else, I think builds confidence when you're in that kind of a positive and empowering environment. So
I think we're kind of we're on the other side of the sword a little bit, which I know this is kind of a weird thing, a weird way to phrase this. So when we look at the sword, it's not just like self-empowerment, self-confidence and stuff like that. There's some judgment aspects, which I think is fair, right? We kind of already packed that in. Now, one of the things that I pose is, do we give our swords away or do we help other people make their own swords, right? And in the case, this is where we talk about empowerment. It's not like you have some of the questions, right? You had an idea, but not a complete idea.
Yeah. Well, I just figured, when you're talking about, about confidence and everything, it's, there has to be a part where you bring others into the equation. That's another hard learned thing,
And so what was a time where you empowered somebody else through, I guess, your own confidence and whatnot to help them reach new heights?
I really, I struggle to find specific examples, but I know that there are plenty of people out there who will say that I've really helped them or empowered them in some way. And I wasn't always so, right. You learn through the course of your career. I think my team these days, I do my best to make sure that they feel empowered, that they know, not that they feel, that they know that they have my trust of the organization, and that they're able to go and do the things that, they say that they're going to do. And I know that if I give them stretch goals here and there, right, that they're not scared to go and try those things out, because there's not going to be a penalty for, for not getting it right the first time,
Mhm.
but I think, just more specifically, we do events on our team, right? So big events, and small events, but like, especially now, where we have this hybrid of being remote and being in person. The last couple of years have really upped the game in terms of the kind of technology available to us. I mean, we're doing this here, Jim, because you know these last couple of years have enabled this. And I mean, I've become a podcaster the last couple of years precisely because we're able to. So same thing goes for work and events. And when we try to create an experience where the people who are in person and the people who are at home, the people who are at a factory, whatever, are all having a shared experience and an enjoyable experience. You talk about complexity. There's a lot of complexity there, right? So I I need to give my team all the room that they have, like all the support that I can give them, so that they can make interesting decisions or that they can try new things. All right. So that thread that we're looking for, that the complexity of all these different people, the simplicity of we are all one team who are working together, to reach us, to do the right thing and to respect each other and to experiment and learn, which by the way are corporate behaviors. But anyway, that's like to do those things, like that's our thread. To put that all together, you need to have people who are able to think freely and able to act freely. And anyway, the team does this and they do such a fantastic job. Every event is better than the last. I do not get involved with micromanaging any of it. I serve pretty much, if there's a big RACI chart, the RACI, roles, the roles that you assign people, and it'd be
Yeah, I don't
responsible,
remember. It's RACI. Yeah,
accountable, consulted, and informed, right?
yeah, something like
Um,
that.
the responsible and accountable parties, like the people who do it are responsible. Like I'm accountable because it's my team. Like the buck stops with me, but I'm really the the advisory party. Like I'm there to advise and they inform me, right? So more on the A side than the other two. So as long as the I allow the team to go unfettered and do their responsible and accountability part, I can come in as an advisor, or they can inform me and I'm part of it, but they have the so so that empowers them to do their work. And by the way, these events have turned out terrific and amazing. And I think that's one of the valuable ways that I've empowered people, at least professionally.
Yeah. That is important across the board. And so now we'll go ahead and wrap up the sword. Again, the sword is something it's a close cousin of the pen. For those who my consistent viewers, well, they're almost of the same substance. So we'll kind of jump over to the pen and have some fun there. All right. So, Dan, we have made it to the pen now.
Mm.
So, the pen, close cousin of the sword, on the same playing field. And I really only have two questions I ask here. And the first of those questions is, hang on, just real quick. A little background here.
Yeah.
2,000 years in the future, both of these questions take place.
Okay.
2,000 years in the future.
Right.
All right. The first one is, what is the essence that you want people to remember you for, or you want to leave on society or something to that effect? What is the essence of that idea and why?
We've been talking a lot about my professional activities. And I feel like this question leans a lot more toward a holistic view of my life, right? And I've only been talking about the professional stuff because it's easier to explain and to talk about. But remember, I have my family, and I mean, there's nothing more important than that. My girls and all three of them, my wife and my two daughters. I suppose my dogs too, but really, 2,000 years, nobody can remember me as a dog guy. They'll remember, hopefully that I raised, or I was a good dad, and whatever kind of learnings or um, impressions that I've given my girls, I'm hoping that they go on to have families of their own, whatever form and shape that may be. But I'm hoping they go on to have families of their own. And it's like I'm just starting the snowball off, or at least I'm not starting it. I'm carrying it on from those who have come before me. So, I think that 2,000-year-old snowball is going to look a lot bigger and a lot different than it does today. But the essence of it, I think, will still be there. And that's going to be like, you know, um, it's like a ball of kindness infused with curiosity, maybe, and just this constant value that nothing, all this work stuff that you do, and all the things that you may get, and achieve in your life are basically worthless without that human connection, right? And this is something like what you talked about at the very beginning of the show, the power of connection. And you know, I want 2,000 years from now, people to hopefully say that guy, he really understood the power of connection, and his progeny, and the people he's touched in his life. I mean, it's a terrible thing to say out of context, but the things that I've the lives that I've interacted with, are have stronger connections with one another because they were connected to me. That would be an amazing kind of legacy to leave. And I mentioned curiosity because, um, let's talk for a second about my show. And this is the other piece of it is, I have my work, right? But I have a very strong belief or passion in creativity and curiosity, right? And the way I express that is through my podcast. We all have things that we create. Whether you know it or not, I think everybody's a creator in one way, shape, or form. You're creating this show, Jim, among other things. But I mean, look, a podcast, a show is a creative adventure. An hour ago, there was nothing, right? We're just creating all this, hopefully great content. So, in the end, there's gonna be this body of work, and I'm assuming that let's make an assumption that the creative work that we do will live on and be accessible. And if we can assume that that's true, then then 2,000 years from now, people will remember me by listening to me. I mean, you can hear what I have to say about these things. They'll listen to this show and they'll say, oh yeah, it's the guy to talk about simplicity. Sure. I mean, that's, I would love for that. I would love for people to remember that, oh yeah, hey, yeah, nice guy, good conversationalist, really understood a lot about curiosity and power of connections. That would be a really nice way to be remembered. Loved his kids, that sort of thing.
Well, I think that's interesting. I don't want to give too much away, but I think we have a good segue into later. But the second question,
Mhm.
right? Now this is another doozy, right? Is what in the future they're doing an archaeological dig on wherever your house resides or something like that, right? What is one item only that you want them to find, and why?
Wow. That is a doozy. That is a doozy. I am beside myself here because, like, there's no one item that says, okay, this is me, right? And maybe people would say like a framed photograph of the family, and that's something I would love people to find. It's the only single item maybe that encapsulates what I want, I think, or what I want people to remember, which is, that I am a lot more than, or the most important thing that I've ever done and created is that family, is my girls. So in that sense, if that's the one thing, that frame photo of me and my wife and my kids, then that would be a winner, in any sense. And if I can just say one other thing, I mean, I'm going to cheat here, man.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to say maybe the other thing would be this microphone, or a microphone. It doesn't have to be this one. But I think the microphone, and we didn't talk about this, but we have the personal life-changing events, death of my dad, meeting the rabbi, here seeing my grandmother, going to Japan, all this stuff. But when I took this whole adventure of podcasting into my own hands, like of creating something into my own hands a couple of years ago, that was a massive life changer from a personal and professional standpoint, because now here I am making something that I control, or I control to the extent that, I'm on one side and directing the conversation. But this microphone has been the connective force between me and, at this point, dozens, high double digits people, but at some point in the future, that might be thousands of people. And I think the power of that is, and the symbology of it is pretty strong. I talk about connecting. Obviously, I want people to, I want to hear people and I want to talk to people. And the only danger I think that runs is people see a microphone, it might come off as a sort of narcissistic thing, like where, oh yeah, I'm out there to talk. But frankly, I'm out there to listen more than anything else. I love hearing what people have to say and keeping that going, keeping those conversations going. So yeah, the picture and the microphone. I'm sorry, I did two things.
You're fine. You're fine. Hopefully they'll find two things. No, I appreciate that. I like that. That both of those items together kind of, I think, give a good essence of who you are in more ways than one. Maybe what we can do here is we can get a microphone with your picture, with your family's picture on it.
I'm going to have to take a picture. Yeah, I'm going to have to take a picture of me with a microphone surrounded by my family.
Well, or just make it the microphone.
Or a mic with the picture on.
Yeah. Put like a wrap or something, that might work.
That's a good idea too. And then I can look at them while I'm talking to people.
Exactly. So we'll go ahead now and transition into the crown. You take a sip of water. I gotta think here.
No worries, man. I've given you a lot of material. I'm sorry. Do people talk this much? I'm sorry.
My typical thing goes about an hour and a half anyway, so we're still on time.
Good. Okay, great. I don't feel bad then.
Oh no. Okay. So I think, so the crown, what does that represent? Well, that kind of is the binding agent in many ways of all of these things. It's the idea of self-discipline, leading yourself, leading others. we've kind of touched on leading on leading others a little bit in the sword and by empowering them and stuff like that. I don't want to go too far on the professional side. I
Yeah.
kind of want to dial in on the latter part, because we talked about the crown, right? In the pen writing, and not writing, but leaving behind this essence of kindness, curiosity, power of connection with the family and the microphone. And one of the things that I guess the first question I want to ask is, what is the hardest thing about disciplining yourself to pursue your creative side?
That's what I struggle with all the time, right? So the hardest thing is the things that are not abundant. Okay, let me clarify a little bit. I always say, and I've said many times on the record, that I believe in an abundance mentality, right? I think that there's, for the vast majority of things, there's no such thing as a zero sum game, right? We're additive. You know, by virtue of us doing this podcast, we're not taking away the chance for me to be on another podcast. We're not taking away our voices from someplace else. We're adding to the general universe here. So we're creating. It's an abundance. The one thing, though, that is not subject to the abundance mentality is time. It's the only thing that there's a fixed amount of, right? It's the only thing that we can't do in abundance. We have no control over that. And that's why I think time is the biggest challenge, really, to I guess, to being who I want to be, and to keeping that my creative forces going, and to staying disciplined. Discipline is also a challenge. So I've got it's a combination of things. So time is a problem or a challenge, because I've got a day job. My time is already apportioned and owed to other people for the vast majority of my day. Add to that, I have my own personal struggles with discipline. And, we talked about like all these great things. Yeah, I'm confident and I do this and whatever. But, the hard one, I guess, point of my life now where I feel like, oh yeah, I'm standing on solid ground with creativity and with kindness and curiosity, and I believe in my company, and I'm solid in my job, and I know what I'm doing. Like, that's all the solid stuff. But being a human and being a person with a family history, and with, all these whatever other things are going on around, I'm subject to some of the same things everybody else is. Of course, anxiety, occasional depression, it happens. And what might be is sort of, like serial procrastination is something I struggle with. I need to keep things interesting and excited, or I get bored and I want to change things up easily. And there are still a lot of projects that I've started and just haven't finished. So I'm a great starter and not the greatest finisher. Now I'm knocking those out one by one, but I still have my book. I talked about that for 2 years now. I've talked about my book, and I haven't made much progress in it over the last 6 or 8 months. It's one of the many things. So I have my own demons to fight here. And so in the limited amount of time that we have, I have to focus on the job, and I want to focus on my podcast, and I do those things. I get those top priorities done. It's the other kind of that whole, like, the ecosystem of creative work that I really want to do, that I feel like I'm still not quite, I haven't figured out the formula yet, if that makes sense. So that's sort of what's holding me back. That said, I do the best in what I have. And I know that the things that I do, the job, the podcast, my family, I do well. So I'm trying not to beat myself up about it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to make sure that I have to give myself permission to not do everything.
Yeah,
That makes
and I
sense.
think that kind of goes back to what we talked about in the hammer a little bit, is understanding what matters and having a little bit, of simplification in a complex environment.
Yeah.
Um, and that makes sense. And so, I mean, for the crown, that's kind of the big, like a big thing here, is disciplining yourself, not just in a business environment, which
Yeah.
that's a dime a dozen. We can talk about that all day, but really choosing to pursue your passion for creativity
Yeah.
and pulling people together and making these great connections and so on and so forth
Yeah.
is a really difficult thing to do. And so
Well,
I appreciate you sharing that.
yeah, and what ultimately wins it all though for me, like, is just that goes back to that power of connection, like we talked about before. Um, there's something magical about about uh, connecting with somebody. And I don't mean just like, checking off a box on LinkedIn and say we're connected now. I mean, you spend time, get to know someone. Doesn't have to be too deep, but you get to know somebody a little bit, spend some time, converse. There's something there. There's always something there. And then, that person is now, part of your universe. I mean, like, you've just expanded your potential to not only reach out to other people, but and to meet more people, but to touch another person's life, in an incredible way. You don't know who that next person's going to be, and you don't know who that person is really, but those connections are really what keep you going. So I think about that. I think about when I'm stuck, or when I'm thinking about like what's driving me to do that next podcast episode. Like, that's never a hard decision. Like, if I don't put out a podcast, it's simply because time got the best of me, and I just I have too much on my plate, and doing what I can to remedy that. But you make your choices about where you're going to where you're going to you know use your time. You have to. That said, I am driven by, in many ways, by this idea that I can have a conversation with you, Jim, for an hour ish, and now I know you, or you know me, and it goes both ways.
Mhm.
And my life is now so much richer than it was an hour ago.
Yeah.
I hope. I hope you feel the same way.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
certainly,
Absolutely.
you know what I
Absolutely.
mean? Like, so that's a kind of wealth that you can't buy. You just have to, you have to make that connection with people. And look, some people are reluctant to do that. Some people make fewer connections than others, but there's always that. It's always there.
All right. So, Dan, thanks so much for coming on Meeting Forge. And I must say, your story's been great from start to finish. The questions, the answers, awesome.
My pleasure.
And just to kind of like sum up here, from Bayonne, New Jersey,
Yep.
growing up, starting in grandma's shop and the record store next door, right? Like we're going full Goonies here, just for that reference, just for fun. Uh, and the Stranger Things is the more modern day interpretation of
Very
the
much.
70s and 80s. Uh, but your journey through life to Philadelphia and to school to Japan, spending that time in Japan, making who you are, kind of transitioning from the Japan business to where you are today has been extremely interesting in watching this story unfold. And I mean, talking about like writing stories and being a storyteller, you told a beautiful story.
Thank you.
Uh, so in the Hammer, we talked about like how we can pull these stories together and in a way make sure that we cut away the things that aren't needed at a particular time and place in our lives. I think we can apply that to and understanding what matters. And then in the sword, we talked about how confidence comes into that, and from experience, life experience, pain points, and how you have to overcome them, and then empowering other people as well, and share. And I guess in a way, sharing that confidence is a way I would frame it. With the pen, we really shifted gears a little bit because there's so much that we can talk about in people's lives. Uh, it's amazing what can come up, and you know, you want to be known for being a good dad, and kindness, curiosity, and the power of connection. And I think that's captured beautifully. And although it's not an item, it's two items. It's a picture of your family and a pic in a microphone.
Yeah.
Now, maybe in the future you can get a wrap around your microphone base that has a picture of your family, and what a great conversation piece that would be in the future. Um, and then we went to the crown, right? And heavy is the head that wears the crown, because it's a massive burden and responsibility that we have to take on. And that maintaining the passion for creativity and disciplining yourself is really kind of revolving around time and understanding what matters. So we see the same threads, right, from beginning to end, in multiple points where it kind of frays off and goes on its own little adventure, but then kind of comes back. And it's again, it's been a privilege to have you on. And I hope I did some justice in summarizing that.
Well, we talked about the idea of how do you take it from complexity to simplicity, and you've just done a beautiful job of that. Exactly. I mean, I can just talk and talk and talk and talk. In fact, I did. And you pulled out, that thread, like that core of it. Yeah, I appreciate the way that you did that, because once, I'm gonna re-listen to this again and again whenever I feel like, who am I again? I'm gonna just kind of replay this episode a little bit to just
Perfect.
ground myself, because I think that you've really helped me out here. I mean, you know, you go around life um, just buried in the minutia of the day, or dealing with all those kind of things around you, and you know, you're always like, you're either serving other people, or or a client, or an employer. You're helping your family, you're doing things. It's hard to sit there and take a few minutes and really, focus in and define yourself in those times. And good self-awareness requires that you do that from time to time. But you know, the older you get, I think the older you get generally, and I hope this is the case for many of us, but the older we get, the better we are at just kind of, understanding who we are. Um, but the value of talking it through, and the way that you've laid out, with the forge, man. I mean, what a great metaphor. And I mean, I said that the first time that we met, but I mean it. Just that's what it is. That's what life kind of feels like. Like sometimes you just have to get in there, hammer it out, and and create something that's solid and usable, and serves a purpose, and hopefully looks beautiful, at the same time, and serves, serves you, and and shows others around you the kind of person that you are. So, yeah, I've appreciated this whole conversation. It's been enlightening to me.
Perfect. Well, I guess I don't have to ask the question, what did you get from this interview? Or did
Ha!
you get anything from this interview? Because you just laid it all out
I
there.
just
So
did.
perfect. Thanks. I guess what I would ask now is, what uh I guess what is your favorite symbol so far? Like, is it the hammer, the
Hmm.
sword, the pen, or the crown?
Well, being a super Marvel fan, the hammer goes a long way. Of course, Mjolnir is like, you know, is really the thing. But I don't know. I mean, I guess as somebody who's in the creative space, the pen makes the most sense to me. Um, but all of all of these pieces have an important role to play in your life, and the way that you've put it together. But but probably the pen would be my favorite.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many different ways we can have conversations, and so like, unfortunately, you can't peel back everything in
Yeah.
an hour and a half conversation. It has to take some time, and it's I appreciate you taking the time. And so I guess the next question here is, what are 3 books that you recommend somebody read?
3 books? Gosh. I'm gonna have to think about that for just a minute. Because so my 3 answers today for this are gonna be different than my 3 answers tomorrow or another day. That's just the way it is. I mean, I've read so many books. I'm also not a huge fan of business books, right? I
Mhm.
am. I mean, there are some great ones, but I'm much more into novels and things like that. But I think that you need to mix it up a little bit in life. So I'll try to give a little smattering. Okay. Um, as far as like a great businessy book or nonfiction book, I would go probably with either like The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell
Mm.
as the first. Um, it might appeal more to people who are of a sort of marketing-y nature, but it shouldn't. It's a study of how people interact with one another, and Gladwell is just a genius. But it I for me, it helped me to define sort of why I like to connect with people, right? Like, it gave me some sort of like a nice little background to that. Like, whoa, wait a second, I'm a connector, or am I a maven? I'm not sure. No, I'm a connector, right? And it sort of helped me to see the value of that. But I love the tipping points. That's the first one. Um, I guess as far as so the tipping point, um, I would go with um, all right. Bear with me on this one. I'm not sure which book because there's so many of them,
Mhm.
but let's just say the collected works of Elmore Leonard. Okay.
Okay.
No, I mean that's like 70 books. I don't know. He's prolific. If you're going to choose one of his books, maybe Get Shorty, or I love Maximum Bob. There's a bunch. It may sound frivolous, but as a student of writing and as somebody who appreciates unique insights into others, I think Elmore Leonard, may he rest in peace, has the is maybe the second best writer of dialogue in the history of the English language.
Mm.
It goes William Shakespeare for artistic, like, and Shakespeare wasn't even like, it wasn't necessarily that his dialogue was authentic and realistic. It was just so good.
Yeah.
And Elmore Leonard. Um, some people say George Bernard Shaw and Elmore Leonard. Take your pick, but he is it's that good, and I just appreciate the art of it all. So anything by Elmore Leonard, and I guess the third one I would say. Let me take a quick look at my shelf here, if you don't mind.
Okay. By all means. By all means.
Yeah, so many.
How's this? How's this? As a storyteller, what is your favorite story?
Oh, oh man, that's even harder than what's the favorite book.
Perfect.
Well, no, I mean, like, Elmore Leonard is up there for sure. Like,
Mhm.
he's a master storyteller. Just and the reason that he's a master storyteller is because he drives it by dialogue. It's not a lot of a lot of descriptive stuff. It's really just you you listen to people talk, essentially read people talk, but it's like, generally speaking, the dialogue drives everything. So it's the
Mhm.
same answer. Anything by Elmore Leonard, but I uh, I love the Raylan novels. Like, he talks about, if you've ever seen the series Justified
Mhm.
on FX, it's based on Elmore Leonard's Raylan novels. So that's
Okay.
his character. He's so good. Hang on. Oh gosh. So I'm just looking around. And I have to go with it. No, I got to go with one book here. It's just so. I was trying to think of a non-business book. I mean, I would say, Lord of the Rings. Everybody's got to read Lord of the Rings. It's just, it is it. You get the geek in me when I talk about it, but oh, you've got it. Yeah, you've got it up around you too.
Right. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's all Tolkien.
Well, I got to agree with you on the Tolkien stuff. I read Lord of the Rings at least 7 or 8 times, but the last time I read it was probably 20 years ago. But my kids have read it. I've made, so I said, so what I say, Lord of the Rings. I said the collected works of Elmore Leonard and Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point. Yeah, so those are 3. I could easily add. The New Rules of Marketing and PR by David Meerman Scott as one of the most insightful and kind of important marketing books of the last 25 years, defining digital marketing for the first time. Just incredibly important book and really, really well written. I guess the other work of fiction, I now that you got me going, I can't leave a conversation without saying you have to absolutely read Dune. I mean, there's almost no substitute for the Frank Herbert, J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, you don't have to read anything beyond the first one, right? Beyond Dune itself, although it's all good. But Dune.
Fun fact: Tolkien did not like Dune.
I heard that. He didn't
There's
like
a letter.
Frank Herbert's. Yeah, there is. Did he find it derivative, or was he just?
He just didn't like it. I don't remember all the details, but Tolkien, he was a. So I mean, not to get too crazy, but Tolkien is heavily influenced by Celtic and Norse mythology,
right?
And then heavily built a world because his whole objective was to build a world, like a mythology for Britain, like Bellerand is where all of Middle Earth is supposed to kind of take place, like is part of Middle Earth, and that's derived from the Lay of a True, I want to say it is, or the Corgan 1 and 2, and so like there's like your Nerds of the Ring for the
there
day.
It is.
But yeah, he just didn't like it. I don't remember all the reasons why, but I think it probably has something to do with world building.
I mean, as a science fiction person and a fantasy person, you got to read all the big ones like that. Yeah. There's a lot of great work coming out constantly, and I can't keep up. I'm just I'm sort of a freaking geek, I guess, about Tolkien and about Dune and about those other things. So,
well, you sure are in good company.
Oh man, thank you. Thank you. I mean, no joke though. I mean, you got it. That's, Heinlein, any of the Heinlein books from the early days, and are some of the greatest pieces of science fiction ever written. Stranger in a Strange World. I read that in my late teens, early 20s, and it was like scandalous for me. But it's such an important book. Stranger in Strange Land, if you ever get a chance, if you haven't read that, that's another massive science fiction book that I think people need to read. I don't know. I know we're going off a little bit here.
We definitely went off, but
that
kind of gets to the illusion of the pen a little, like to the illusion of the pen a little bit, right? And circling back into the meaningforge symbology, because so for example, a pen becomes what someone can write down or something to that effect in their journal or in a story or in a business book. And then when people are making themselves in the future, that becomes a source of influence, much like your rabbi influencing you through the music and that he grew up with. Right. And I'm really simplifying that.
Yeah.
But like that's the iterative cycle in some regards, and I would say upward cycle of life, not just a circle of life, but an upward cycle.
I like that.
But Dan, it's been great on my show. My guest had the last words, and I look forward to having your final words. So,
man, no pressure, right?
No pressure. It's like whoever you're talking to is watching this right now, and what do you want them to take away?
Sure.
So
Um,
hang on.
sure.
Here he goes.
I have to say that throughout, the years I've been working and um, interacting and connecting with people, building my networks from the early days of LinkedIn back in whatever it was 2003, um, connecting with hundreds and not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands of people, I suppose, on that platform. But then, all of the networking events I've been, all of the people I've met in person, and I keep coming back to this whole idea that it's that power of human connection, of the tremendous value that each person brings you, as long as you open up and let them in. Um, that just can't be discounted, and stay open to that. That's the first thing, is I would say, is be open to those connections. And, I'm not talking about these random inquiries that you get asking you to, for no reason at all, to be part of a network, and then you get terrible emails or spam junk following that. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, evaluate every chance to make a new friend, a new contact, um, because it can do nothing but add value to your life. And the I guess the that openness that you want to maintain when you meet others is fueled essentially by one big thing, and that's curiosity. Curiosity might be, the most important value to a creator, um, and to a connector, because, you know, that curiosity is your genuine desire to learn and know about that other person, or that other thing, but in this case, that other person. And I'm gonna kind of wrap this up, I think, in the immortal words of Ted Lasso, via Walt Whitman, probably. I think Walt Whitman said this first, so it's actually Walt Whitman via Ted Lasso, is, "Be curious, not judgmental." Um, and if you're a Ted Lasso fan, you'll know that was a fantastic episode, but that's it, isn't it? Being curious, not judgmental, you know, um, being open to others, asking questions, genuinely wanting to know the answers, instead of snapping to conclusions and assumptions that oftentimes are responsible for your own anxieties and the issues that you're going to face in your life. So, that curiosity, openness, kindness, um, and the power of connection, I think, are, if you can take that away from my experiences and what I've done with my life and what I have yet to do with my life, then this has been time extremely well spent. So, Jim, thanks very much.